Look at this blueberry leaf with me, the young one right at the tip of the branch. See how it has gone a pale, sickly yellow, while the little veins running through it stay a stubborn bright green. Gardeners see that and reach straight for fertilizer, certain the plant is starving. And here is what breaks my heart a little. That plant may be sitting in soil absolutely full of the very iron it is crying out for, and it still cannot get a single mouthful. It is not hungry. It is locked out, and no amount of feeding will hand it the key. This is the one plant in your whole garden where the usual thinking will fail you completely, and where a homemade mix truly can make the difference between a bush that gives you a sad handful and one that hangs heavy with fruit. But the mix is not what you think, and neither is the secret behind it. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the thing that makes blueberries explode with fruit is not a food at all. It is a key. Here is the hard truth that no fertilizer bag will ever print on its label. Your blueberry is not underfed. It is locked out of the pantry, and the lock is the sourness of the soil. Every plant has a range of soil acidity in which it can actually reach the food around it, and most vegetables are easygoing about it. The blueberry is not. It is one of the fussiest plants you will ever grow, and it demands soil that is genuinely, sharply acidic, down around a pH of 4.5 to 5.5, far more sour than your lettuce or your beans would ever tolerate. And here is the cruel mechanism. When the soil creeps up out of that range, even a little, toward the neutral middle where most gardens sit, the iron and several other nutrients in the ground bond up tight to the soil and simply will not release. The pantry is full. The door is bolted. That yellow leaf with green veins is the plant pressed against the glass, staring at food it cannot touch. You could pour on fertilizer by the barrelful and it would change nothing, because this was never a shortage. It is a chemistry problem, and you solve it with acid, not with more food. To understand why this one plant is so particular, you have to picture where it comes from. A blueberry is not a plant of tidy garden beds. It is a wild thing of the acid woods, the pine barrens and the peat bogs and the cool mountain slopes, where fallen needles and old leaves have soured the ground for 1,000 years. My father planted a row of blueberry bushes along the edge of our woodland when I was a small boy, in that sour, mossy ground without even knowing why it worked, and I still walk out and pick from those same bushes today, decades on. That is the kind of plant this is. It reaches back into your past and forward into your grandchildren's. But it will only give like that if you give it the sour, wild home it never stopped longing for. And there is a hidden reason the acid matters so much, one that lives down in the roots where you cannot see it. A blueberry has strange roots, fine as thread and shallow, and unlike almost every other plant, they have no root hairs, none of the tiny fuzz that most plants use to drink from the soil. Instead, the blueberry strikes up a partnership. Threads of a special fungus wrap around and into those delicate roots and become, in effect, the root hairs the plant never grew, reaching out into the soil to gather water and food and hand it back to the bush. It is one of the oldest bargains in nature, but that fungus, like the plant it serves, will only thrive in sour ground. Let the soil sweeten, and you do not just lock the pantry, you starve the very helper that does the plant's shopping. So everything comes back to keeping the ground acid and alive. So the mix I make for blueberries is really about souring the earth and feeding the little fungal partners, and almost not at all about feeding the bush directly. Let me give it to you in its parts. The foundation is laid before you ever plant, and it is the most important step. Dig your hole wide and work in a great deal of acidic organic matter, and the classic is peat moss, which is naturally sour, around a pH of 3 to 4. Mix it half and half with your soil, so the bush's roots settle into ground that is acidic from the very first day. Then, to hold that acidity and to bring it down further if your soil is too sweet to begin with, the real tool is elemental sulfur, a simple yellow powder you dust onto the soil and water in. It does not work overnight. Soil bacteria slowly turn that sulfur into acid over weeks and months, which is exactly why you spread it well ahead of time and let it do its patient work. A soil test first will tell you how far you have to go, and it is worth every penny, because with blueberries you are flying blind without it. On top, lay a generous mulch of pine needles, pine bark, or old sawdust, 2 to 4 inches of it, kept back a little from the stems. This mulch does 3 jobs at once. It slowly acidifies the ground as it breaks down. It holds the steady moisture those shallow roots must have, and it feeds the soil life. Refresh it every autumn. That mulch is half the secret right there. Now for the liquid part of the mix, and keep it gentle. Take a gallon of rainwater, and I mean rainwater on purpose, because tap water in many places is slightly alkaline and hard, and over the years it will quietly raise your pH and undo all your work. Into that rainwater stir 1 tablespoon of molasses, not for the bush but to feed the fungi and microbes in the soil, the plant's true providers. That is your regular drink for the soil life. And 2 or 3 times in the growing season, at bud break in spring and again after the flowers have set, you may add a measured, modest dose of a proper acid-loving plant food to that water, the kind sold for azaleas and rhododendrons. That and only that is how you feed a blueberry. And be careful what you reach for, because the usual garden kindnesses are pure poison here. Do not ever give a blueberry lime or bone meal or wood ash or fresh manure. Every one of those sweetens the soil toward neutral, which is precisely the disaster we are fighting. I have watched a well-meaning neighbor kill a fine blueberry bush with a generous scattering of wood ash. Sure, he was doing it a favor, and I did not have the heart to tell him it was the ash that starved it. If you must add nitrogen, use the ammonium kind, the sort in those acid plant foods, because a blueberry actually prefers its nitrogen in that form and can barely use the other. The old rule my father kept was simple. For most of the garden, feed the plant. For the blueberry, feed the ground and keep it sour. Now, someone always asks me about vinegar, so let me be honest with you the way I always am. Yes, a splash of vinegar in the watering will drop your soil's pH for a day or 2. But it washes out fast, the effect is gone almost before it began, and chasing it turns you into a man forever bailing a leaky boat. Vinegar is a patch, not a repair. The lasting answer is the slow, steady work of sulfur and acid mulch and rainwater, the things that hold the ground sour season after season without your hand on the can every day. Do the real thing, and you will not need the tricks. Here is the secret that doubles a blueberry harvest, and it happens not with a mix at all, but with a pair of shears in the dead of winter. It is the thing nearly every home gardener skips, and it is why so many old bushes stand there full of leaves and give almost nothing. A blueberry does not fruit just anywhere on the bush. It fruits on wood that grew the season before, young shoots springing from healthy canes, and those plump little buds at the tips of last year's growth are next summer's berries. As a cane ages past 5 or 6 years, it turns woody and tired and gives smaller, poorer fruit, and a bush left entirely unpruned slowly fills up with that old, spent wood and stops making the fresh young shoots that carry the crop. So every winter, while the bush is dormant and bare, you take your shears and cut out the oldest, thickest canes right down at the ground, about 1 in 3, or 1 in every 6 on a big old bush. It feels like vandalism the first time. You are cutting away wood that looks perfectly good. But that cut forces the plant to throw up vigorous new canes from the base, and it is those young canes that will pour out berries in a year or 2. A blueberry pruned this way, a little every winter, never grows old. It renews itself forever. One thing you must never do is shear the bush into a neat ball, because the fruit buds live in the outer few inches of the branches, and shearing cuts every one of them off. Cut deep and selective, never shallow and all over. And in the first year or two after planting, I am going to ask you to do the hardest thing a gardener ever does. Pinch off every single flower. Every one. I know how that sounds, to strip the blossoms from a plant you are longing to eat from. But a young blueberry that is allowed to fruit spends itself on those few early berries and builds a weak plant. Rob it of every flower for a season or two, force all that energy down into roots and canes instead, and you build a strong bush that will outproduce the greedy one many times over for the next 20 years. The growers have measured it. A bush pinched in its youth gives you far more sooner than when you let fruit too early. It takes faith to pull off those first flowers. Do it anyway and thank yourself in 5 years. One bush alone will feed you. 2 will bury you. This is another thing the catalogs whisper too quietly. Most blueberry varieties can set fruit with their own pollen alone, so a single bush will give you a crop. But plant 2 or 3 different varieties near each other, so the bees can carry pollen from one to another, and something wonderful happens. The berries come bigger, they come earlier, and there are far more of them because a flower cross-pollinated by a neighbor sets a fuller, heavier fruit than one left to itself. And the best carriers of that pollen are not the honeybees at all but the big native bumblebees and their kin, who know a trick called buzz pollination, gripping the flower and shivering the pollen loose with a shudder of their bodies. So plant more than one kind, and plant flowers nearby to keep those fat bumblebees happy and near, and never spray them while the bush is in bloom. Mind the roots, too, because blueberries are unlike any others in your garden. They sit shallow, right up near the surface, fine and thirsty and easily hurt. So never dig or hoe deep around a blueberry, or you tear the very roots that feed it. Pull weeds by hand instead. And water it faithfully, an inch or two a week, because those shallow roots dry out fast and a thirsty blueberry drops its fruit or ripens it small and hard, especially in the heat of summer when the berries are swelling. But do not drown it either, for roots that sit in soggy ground will rot. Steady and moist, never bone dry and never waterlogged, with that good acid mulch holding the balance. Get the water right and the acid right, and half your battles are already won. If your garden soil is hopelessly sweet and no amount of sulfur seems to hold it down, do not despair, because a blueberry will grow beautifully in a large pot, and there you rule the soil completely. Fill a big container, half a barrel or larger, with a proper acidic mix made for rhododendrons and azaleas, or your own blend heavy with peat and pine bark, and you have handed the bush the sour home it craves without fighting your whole yard for it. Water it with rainwater, mulch the top with pine needles, and feed it the same gentle acid food. A potted blueberry dries out faster, so watch the water closely through the summer, and in the coldest regions tuck the pot against the house for winter, since roots in a container feel the cold far more sharply than roots buried in the ground. Some of the finest backyard blueberries I have ever tasted never touched the native soil at all. And a fair warning for the happy day your berries finally turn blue. You will not be the only one waiting. The birds count the ripening days as closely as you do, and they will strip a loaded bush clean in a single morning if you let them. A light net thrown over the bush as the fruit begins to color is all it takes to keep the harvest yours instead of theirs. I want to tell you why I plant blueberries at all, at my age, when I may not see the best of what I put in the ground. Because a blueberry is a slow and patient gift. It is not a bean you sow and eat in 2 months. A young bush takes a few years to find its stride and does not reach its full, glorious bearing until it is 8 or 10 years old, and then it will go on giving for decades, longer than many of us will be here to pick it. My father knew he was planting for a boy who would grow old under those same bushes, and he was right. When you set a blueberry in sour, well-mulched ground, you are not gardening for this summer. You are handing fruit to your future self, and to whoever stands in your yard long after you. There is an old saying that a society grows great when the old plant trees, whose shade they will never sit in. A blueberry is that tree, made small enough for any backyard. Let me set the whole of it down simply. A blueberry's whole life depends on sharply acidic soil, down around 4.5 to 5.5, so test your soil and get it there before anything else. If the leaves yellow while the veins stay green, that is the pantry locked by sweet soil, not hunger, and the answer is acid, not fertilizer. Build the bed with peat moss, hold the acidity with elemental sulfur spread ahead of time, and mulch every year with pine needles or bark. Water with rainwater when you can, feed the soil life with a spoon of molasses, and give only a gentle acid-loving plant food 2 or 3 times a season. Never give it lime, ash, bone meal, or manure. Every winter, cut the oldest canes to the ground to force young, fruitful wood, and never shear the bush into a ball. Pinch off all the flowers the first year or two to build a strong plant. Plant 2 or 3 varieties together for bigger, earlier, heavier crops, and keep the bumblebees happy. Water steady, weed by hand, and be patient, because this is a plant that pays you back for years. Now go and find the youngest leaves on your blueberry bush, and red their color the way we did today. If they are yellowing with green veins, you know the door is locked, and now you know how to open it. Then tell me down below where you garden, and what your soil is like, and whether you have ever tasted a berry off a bush you planted yourself. Tell me about the ones your father or your grandmother planted, if you were lucky enough to grow up with them. I read every single one late at night with my tea, and I learn as much from your stories as you might from mine. Then go out and sour the ground, lay the pine mulch down thick, and plant a second bush beside the first for the bees to work between. Feed the soil and not the plant, keep it acid and alive, and a blueberry will hand you baskets of fruit for longer than you can imagine, and a kind of patience that only a slow plant can teach. That is the old way. And the old way still holds.